Hello, everyone. We will be continuing with a new lesson. Today, we are going to talk about variables. But this is one of the most important topics in our course. I kindly ask you to listen to this section carefully. In the following parts, I will be constantly referring back to this. Now, this lesson is about variables, friends. Variable. You might also encounter these as data type. So, there is such a definition. So, what is this variable? Why is it important? And in all programming languages, there are things we call variables. So, what are they used for? Now, to understand this here, you actually need to understand how a computer works. Now, in computers, data is processed using ones and zeros. Everyone probably knows this already. But here's something that isn't usually thought about correctly. Let's take a look together at how humans think and manage memory. For example, if I simply asked you to add 5 and 10, what would you do? You'd quickly say 15. So, what did your brain do in the background to find 15? Do you ever think about that? You don't. Let me ask you a question to help you understand this better. If I asked you to multiply 9,765,345 by 125,444, how would you do it? Solve it in your head. Come on, I even said most of them. You don't even remember the numbers, do you? Which numbers did I say in a row? Which number was I referring to, I wonder? Do you remember? You don't, do you? Why not? Because your brain has a certain capacity to process things, and while it's exposed to some things, it can't remember them. So what do you have to do to solve this problem? I mean, if you really want to multiply these numbers I gave you and tell me the result, what do you need to do? You need to write them down on a piece of paper. You have to write them down and do the calculations one by one. That's exactly how a computer works. Friends, every value you give to the computer is stored in the RAM. RAM is like the place where the computer writes down the data it receives from outside, just like you write on paper. That's what RAM is. While performing the operation, it takes the data from the RAM, does the calculation, and when it's done, it writes the result back to the RAM, friends. Once you understand this, you understand variables. Because in software, you have to store the information coming from the user somewhere, even if it's temporary. The place where this is done, the thing that does this, is the RAM, friends. So, what we call a variable is actually the storage of any value entered into the application or computer from outside in the RAM with certain properties. That's what variables are used for. They store the data coming from outside, friends. When needed, you can access them by using these variables. This is the only important thing here. This is the basic thing you need to understand. So, where exactly are variables? What do they do? And how do they maintain their life cycles? We need to talk about that as well. I'm going to show you a few things, but please don't get hung up on them. I mean, about the things I'm explaining, don't think, wow, these are so hard. There are so many things to learn. It's not like that at all. We're going to talk about everything in a simple way. We'll move forward by understanding the logic behind everything. So, you don't need to worry about what I'm about to show you. You'll understand it. Now, this part, friends. This is the part where Java manages memory, guys. Earlier, we were looking at the communication between the JVM and our actual physical computer. Now, here, we're seeing the situation inside the JVM. There are some details here. These are just to help you visualize things. I'll remind you of these from time to time. That's why I'm showing them, so they stay in your mind. Otherwise, You don't have to understand these right now, because there's no way you can understand something you haven't used, touched, or felt yet. That's usually how it's done. They just explain things one after another, step by step. Then there's no connection. You can't make any connections. So you can't establish the connection between the variable, the heap, and the stack. And if you can't make that connection, it just doesn't work. That's why I'm just showing you these things. I'll keep reminding you as we go along, whenever it's relevant. So, you really don't need to stress about it too much. Again, here you can see different memory management models related to how the system works. You can find these materials I've shown on my GitHub account, but don't dive too deep into them and get confused. I only put these here to show the images. Please, don't focus on anything other than the images. Images, images, images. For now, just keep those in your mind. So, what exactly are these things we call variables, friends? What are they used for? What do they do? Let's start with a simple introduction. Let's say I'm a user and I want to add two numbers. Let's call the first number number 1. Let the first number be 5. And let's have a second number as well. Let this one be 10. For these two numbers to be processed and something to be done with them, what needs to happen? They need to be present in the RAM, inside the RAM, friends. So, how do we keep them in the RAM? We store them in the RAM as little boxes. Boxes. We store them as boxes made up of ones and zeros, and when processing, the computer, specifically the thing called the CPU, the processor, which you might have heard referred to as the core and so on, uses these boxes to perform operations. You can do the basic 4 operations, but all the operations it performs are always with ones and zeros. So how is it that we can see these as numbers? That's where variables come into play. Variables take the characters we input and store them somewhere as ones and zeros. Then, when necessary, as I mentioned, I'll show the flow and the flow schema for these step by step as we go along. I don't want to get too bogged down in all these details and explanations here. I'd rather talk about them when the time comes, because it gets boring. It gets boring when someone talks constantly. After a while, people really do get bored. Teacher, just show us some code so we can actually see what you're writing. That's enough for now. I'll keep reminding you and continue as we go along, friends.